At a family gathering, my brother announced, "She's always been the disappointment, just ask Dad." Laughing, but then my father slammed his glass down and said, "Actually, she's the only one who didn't ask me for money after Mom died." That's not true, right? Dad? I've never liked the phrase black sheep. It always felt too dramatic, like something out of a bad novel. But that's what I was called my entire life, by my siblings, by my cousins, sometimes even by myself. My name is Mariel. I was born in 1978, the youngest of 3 children in a middle-class family in Saratoga Springs, New York. My parents, Richard and Helen, ran a modest antique store together for nearly 3 decades. My brother, Silas, was the eldest, and my sister, Vivian, came in between us. Both of them were louder, flashier, and, according to my mother, full of promise. I, on the other hand, was quiet, studious, and not particularly eager to please. I didn't rebel, not in the traditional sense. I just never fit the mold my parents held for their children. The story I'm about to tell didn't start at that fateful family gathering where everything boiled over, it started much earlier. But that night was the crack that finally split the dam wide open. After I left for college in Albany, I barely returned home. My mother and I had a strained relationship. She once told me, with a laugh and a glass of wine in hand, "You were born tired of us." Maybe she was right. I had no interest in small talk, or in inheriting the antique store, or in gossiping about who was getting married or divorced. Vivian, on the other hand, married rich. Twice. She had a knack for making herself indispensable to whoever had money and status. Silas bounced between jobs, chasing get-rich-quick ideas, and ended up back home more than once. He could talk his way into any room, and out of almost any responsibility. I became a high school literature teacher. I rented a small home with a wild garden I loved tending. I adopted a dog. I didn't make waves. I didn't ask for much. When our mother died in 2017, everything changed. Her death wasn't tragic, she had a slow decline from early-onset Alzheimer's, and by the end, she didn't recognize us. The funeral was simple, tasteful, and full of old family acquaintances I barely remembered. After the funeral, Dad began pulling away. He stopped going to the antique store, and started skipping his weekly poker nights. I called every Sunday, out of duty more than love at first. But slowly, the conversations became easier. He was less gruff than I remembered. About a month after Mom's passing, I visited Saratoga for a long weekend. We sat on the porch, nursing bourbon as the sky turned pink. That night, he told me how disappointed he was in how Vivian and Silas had handled Mom's death. They were more interested in her jewelry than her journals, he said bitterly. A week later, he called me again, and told me that both of my siblings had come to him privately, asking for loans from Mom's life insurance payout. Vivian wanted to renovate her lake house in Vermont. Silas had a business opportunity in Florida. Dad refused them both, and they were furious. I didn't ask for anything. In fact, I'd already started quietly sending Dad groceries, paying to have the porch repaired, and scheduling a monthly house cleaning service. I never asked for recognition. I just knew he needed it, even if he'd never say so. 2 years later, my father was diagnosed with colon cancer. It moved quickly. He passed away in April 2021. What none of us knew was that Dad had rewritten his will in 2018. He left the house and the majority of his assets to me. Not everything, he left each of them a small trust and a few sentimental items, but the house, the business, and the remaining money came to me. All heck broke loose after the reading of the will. Vivian accused me of manipulating him. Silas swore he'd contest the will. Neither could accept the idea that I'd been chosen, not them. I didn't fight. I just kept the antique store going in his name, and I returned to Saratoga full-time. Last Thanksgiving, I agreed to host the family at the house. Mostly because my cousin Anya was flying in from California and wanted one last real family holiday in the old house. I spent the day cooking. I made all of Dad's favorites. The table was full. Silas brought his new girlfriend, a woman at least 15 years younger than him. Vivian was radiant, of course, in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. For a moment, it felt almost peaceful. Until it didn't. We were finishing dessert when Silas raised his glass. To Mariel, he said, with a smirk. She's always been a disappointment, just ask Dad. He laughed. I froze. The table fell silent. I looked at Anya, who looked down at her plate. Vivian had the gall to snicker. But then, my father's voice, like a ghost, shattered the moment. No, not a ghost. A recording. I had almost forgotten the audio journal Dad recorded in his last month, something I'd saved on my phone. He had told me, play it when you need to. I pressed play. His voice rang through the Bluetooth speaker I'd left on for music. I hope Mariel plays this one day, he said. Everyone looked confused. I stared straight at Silas. I want you all to know, Dad's voice continued, Mariel's the only one who didn't come to me with her hand out after your mother died. The only one who gave instead of taking. She never asked for praise. But she earned everything. Don't you dare say otherwise. Silas's face was drained of color. That's not true, right? Dad, he muttered, voice thin. But there was no reply. Only silence. And then my voice, guess he answered that already. After that night, the tone of my family's interactions changed. They still resented me, sure. But the narrative shifted. I wasn't the black sheep anymore, I was the one who had shown up. Who had stayed. Who had given without expectation. Vivian called a week later. She didn't apologize, not exactly, but she thanked me for taking care of Dad. Silas vanished from the family text thread. I heard from Anya that he'd broken up with his girlfriend and moved to Nevada. I kept the house. I kept the store. I started giving talks at local schools about history and preservation. I let the garden grow wild in the back, just like I wanted. I even rescued another dog. Sometimes, I still hear my father's voice in that recording. I play it on nights when the air feels heavy with ghosts. He wasn't perfect, none of us were. But he saw me. And in the end, he spoke the truth. Families break in quiet ways. Not always in explosions, but in silences, in glances, in old wounds never stitched shut. My family broke a long time ago, all that night did was bring it into the light. But here's the thing about light, it reveals. It heals, too. I don't know what the future holds with my siblings. Maybe nothing. Maybe some distant, lukewarm peace. But I have the home I grew up in. I have my garden. I have the store. I have the memory of the only moment my father ever publicly defended me. And that? That was enough. You've always been a disappointment, Mariel, just ask Dad. That's what Silas said, wine glass in hand, smug smile, thinking it was a joke. But I didn't have to say a word. My father, dead for almost 2 years, answered him for me. When my mom died in 2017, we were already a family stretched thin by years of unresolved resentment, favoritism, and passive-aggressive silence. But her death was the thread that finally started to unravel everything. We were never a warm and cozy kind of family. We were more of a brittle, formal kind, one where emotions got swept under rugs and reality was sugar-coated to the point of absurdity. I was the youngest, and from as early as I can remember, I was made to feel like the spare part. Silas, my older brother by 7 years, had always been the golden boy. Confident, loud, full of charisma, but unreliable in every practical sense. He'd drop out of jobs, drift between relationships, but somehow land on his feet because people liked him. He had that kind of social Teflon that let him dodge consequences. Vivian, my sister, was 3 years older than me. She had a sharp tongue, expensive taste, and an uncanny ability to make people feel like they owed her something. She married up, twice, and reinvented herself every few years like clockwork. When she wasn't in crisis, she was preparing for one. Then there was me, Mariel. Quiet, observant, and never quite part of the trio. I went to SUNY Albany, studied education, and became a high school English teacher. I wasn't flashy. I didn't ask for much. I rented a modest little house in Del Mar, surrounded myself with books, and lived quietly with my dog. When Mom passed, I didn't cry at the funeral. That's not to say I didn't mourn, I just didn't perform it like my siblings did. Silas gave a long-winded eulogy about her strength and grace. He hadn't seen her in months, and Vivian wore a black designer coat and cried into a handkerchief like something out of a soap opera. Dad, Richard, didn't say much that day. But the months that followed brought us oddly closer. He stopped going to the store, and I started visiting more frequently. We would sit on the porch, him nursing bourbon, me with tea or wine. Sometimes we'd talk. Sometimes we just sat in silence. It was during one of those porch nights that he mentioned it. Casually, like he was talking about the weather. They both asked me for money, you know. Right after she died. Like vultures. I didn't say anything. Vivian wanted to redo the kitchen in her lake house, he said. Silas had some new idea he was sure would make him rich. Told me he'd pay me back within a year. Neither got a dime. He looked at me then. You're the only one who didn't ask. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. A week later, he left a voicemail on my phone. It was strange, deliberate, like he knew it would matter someday. I hope you hold on to this, he said. In case they ever try to rewrite things. I didn't listen to the whole thing then. I just saved it. Part of me didn't want to know what else he'd said. Fast forward to April 2021, Dad passed from colon cancer. He went quietly. I was there with him at the end. Silas and Vivian showed up 2 days later, both full of regret but strangely absent through most of his decline. What we didn't expect was the will. He left them each something small, a family heirloom, a trust with enough to be polite. But the house, the antique store, and the remaining assets went to me. Cue the fury. Silas called me conniving in an email. Vivian accused me of manipulating a dying man. I didn't respond. I just did what I thought was right, stayed, kept the store running, and tried to rebuild some peace in my life. Anya, our cousin, reached out later that year. She was planning to visit for Thanksgiving and begged me to host, said she missed the old house, wanted to feel connected again. Against my better judgment, I said yes. I cooked for 2 days straight. Cleaned everything top to bottom. Set the table with Mom's old china. When everyone arrived, it was tense, but cordial. Anya brought wine. Vivian brought a tray of overpriced desserts. Silas arrived last, late as usual, with a new girlfriend half his age who clearly had no idea what she'd signed up for. Dinner went smoothly, until dessert. That's when Silas raised his glass, looked directly at me across the table, and said it. You've always been a disappointment, Mariel, just ask Dad. The table fell into stunned silence. He laughed, expecting everyone to join in. Vivian gave a half-hearted chuckle. I sat still. I didn't get up. I didn't cry. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and connected it to the Bluetooth speaker we'd used for background music. And then I pressed play on the voicemail. My father's voice filled the room. If Mariel plays this one day, it's because someone decided to tell lies again. So let me set things straight. There was a pause, long and deliberate. She's the only one who didn't ask me for money after your mother died. She didn't come begging. She didn't pretend to be broken. She showed up. She gave. She earned everything. Silas looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. Vivian's mouth fell open slightly, but she didn't speak. I know they won't believe it, Dad's voice continued. But I'm dead now. So maybe they'll finally shut up and listen. Then it ended. Just static. No one said a word. Silas looked at me. His lips parted like he wanted to say something, maybe argue, maybe lie, maybe apologize. But nothing came out. The rest of the evening went on in a strange, stunned quiet. People left early. Vivian kissed my cheek at the door but didn't look me in the eye. Silas didn't say goodbye. I sat alone in the kitchen that night, washing dishes, hearing my father's words echo in my head. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I didn't feel disappointed. The days after Thanksgiving passed in a blur, not because anything dramatic happened, but because of how quiet everything got. After years of being spoken about like I wasn't in the room, or worse, like I was the cause of every family inconvenience, the silence felt unfamiliar. Strange. A little lonely. But not unwelcome. Anya called me 2 days later. She was the only one who had reached out, and even she sounded unsure of what to say. "I didn't know he recorded that," she said. "Your dad. I mean, I always thought he cared about you, but that was something." I didn't say much in return. What was there to say? I hadn't planned to play the recording. Honestly, I'd forgotten it existed until that moment, until the look on Silas's face pushed something old and tired out of me. I'd spent decades holding back. That night, I didn't. Vivian didn't call. Silas didn't text. By mid-December, I began wondering if that Thanksgiving dinner had burned the last of whatever fragile bridges we still had between us. And maybe it had. But I wasn't in mourning about it. Not exactly. I poured myself into the antique store over the holidays. The town had always been fond of it, and of my parents, so the local foot traffic helped ease the stillness in the house. I started opening earlier, adding little handwritten notes to pieces that had family stories behind them. People appreciated it. I even had a retired couple ask if I'd consider offering appraisals, which Dad used to do. I said yes. It gave me something to focus on. Then, 2 days before Christmas, Vivian showed up at the shop. She didn't call first. Just walked in, wearing a beige wool coat and dark red lipstick that had always reminded me of our mother in her younger years. She didn't smile. Just looked around, slowly, before walking to the counter where I stood rearranging some vintage silverware. "Hi," she said. Flat. Guarded. "Vivian." A long pause passed between us. "I didn't come here to fight," she said eventually. "I just wanted to. I guess I wanted to know how long you've had that message." I looked at her. Her hands were wrapped tightly around the strap of her handbag. The posture of someone who wasn't sure if she'd be welcomed or kicked out. "Since the month after Mom died," I said. "He left it on my voicemail. I never listened to the whole thing until Thanksgiving." She blinked. "Why?" "Because I didn't need to," I said simply. "Until I did." She let out a long breath and sat down on the bench beside the bookshelf. For the first time in a long time, she looked like my sister again, not the perfectly tailored, distant person she'd become. "I guess I thought he loved us all the same," she said. Maybe I wanted to believe that. I didn't respond. I didn't want to be cruel, but I also didn't want to comfort her with a lie. Dad did love us, I think. But he also saw us, all of us, for who we really were. That voicemail wasn't about love. It was about truth. Vivian shifted awkwardly. "Silas hasn't spoken to me since dinner. He says you ambushed him." I almost laughed. "He ambushed me." She gave a small shrug, then stood. "Well." I said what I came to say. "Which was?" She paused. Looked around the shop again, eyes scanning the shelves and dusty sunlight filtering through the front windows. "I guess I just wanted to see it again. The store. The place he built." She met my eyes. "You're doing a good job, you know." I nodded. That was the most I'd ever get from her. And honestly, it was more than I expected. After she left, I locked the front door, made myself a cup of tea in the back room, and sat there in the quiet. The store creaked the way it always did in winter, soft, settling sounds that reminded me of old bones or rocking chairs. I thought about what my father must have felt, sitting here alone after Mom died. How disappointed he must have been to see Silas and Vivian not just grieve, but scramble for money like her death was a payday. And then I thought about that moment at Thanksgiving. How powerful and terrifying it had felt to finally let the truth speak. How no one, not a single person, tried to defend him after Dad's voice played. Not even Vivian. That was what stayed with me. Not the vindication, but the realization that deep down, they knew. Maybe they always had. By New Year's Eve, the text started again. Not many. Not deep. But they were there. Anya sent a picture of her in the old house years ago, sitting in front of the fireplace with me and Vivian and a litter of kittens we'd rescued from the barn. Silas sent a one-word message, "Hey." I didn't respond. Vivian sent a forwarding address. No note. Just the information. I wrote it down anyway. The next few months passed without major confrontation, just long, quiet distances stitched together by the occasional, half-hearted attempt at communication. I didn't chase after anyone, didn't reply to every message. I wasn't angry anymore. But I also wasn't interested in making myself smaller so others could pretend things hadn't happened the way they did. I started thinking more deeply about the antique store and the house. The business had been limping along since Dad got sick, and while I'd managed to keep it afloat, I was still running things the way he had, slow, traditional, tied to old routines. One morning, I sat in the back room with a cup of strong coffee and looked around at the musty shelving, the faded ledger, and the handwritten receipts. I made a decision. I would modernize the business. Not change the soul of it, just evolve. I created a basic website, hired a part-time assistant from the local community college, and started cataloging the more unique pieces for online sales. I also added a section on the site called Helen's Picks, a tribute to my mother's sharp eye for rare items. I added short, honest stories to each one. They weren't sentimental or dramatic. Just simple, real. And people loved them. Within 4 months, sales had doubled. A local magazine did a feature on the shop and my family's history in Saratoga. The photo shoot felt strange at first, but when I stood behind the counter for the final picture, surrounded by the life my parents had built, and I had revived, I felt something close to pride. Not the loud kind. The quiet, steady kind that sinks into your bones and stays. That's when I got the email. It was from Silas. Subject line, "Let's talk?" The body was short, awkward, "Hey. Saw the article. You've done a lot with the place. I wanted to talk about, maybe working together? I've got some contacts who could help grow the online side. Could be good for both of us. Think about it?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Silas, always looking for an angle. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I pulled up an old document on my laptop, a scanned copy of Dad's will. The language was clear. I owned everything outright. I owed them nothing. But that wasn't what mattered anymore. I wasn't going to give him a piece of something he'd once treated like a dead end. I wrote back the next morning, "Silas, I appreciate the message. But no, I'm not interested in working together. This store is finally healthy again, and I won't risk its future by partnering with someone who didn't show up when it counted. I'm sure your contacts are impressive, but I built this from the ground up, and I'm proud of what I've done. I hope you find something you're passionate about. But it's not this. Take care, Mariel." I never heard back. Vivian resurfaced again in spring. She came to town to visit Anya and asked if I'd meet her for coffee. I agreed, out of curiosity more than anything. We sat across from each other at a little place on Broadway. She was still perfectly put together, designer trench coat, heels, nails like tiny polished shields. But something about her felt tired. Less brittle, somehow. "I've been thinking about what Dad said," she admitted. "I used to believe I deserved more because I'd put up with more. But the truth is, I only ever showed up when it benefited me." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the honesty. I'm not asking for anything, she added quickly. I just wanted to say that. Out loud. I nodded. Thanks. She looked down at her coffee. Are we okay? I don't know, I said honestly. But we're better than we were. She smiled, just a little. And that was that. That summer, the shop hosted its first open house. I cleared out the back lot, rented a few tables and chairs, and invited the community. People brought old family heirlooms to be appraised, shared stories about my parents, and donated photos from decades past. It felt more like a celebration than a business event. Toward the end of the evening, as the sun dipped behind the tall maples out back, Anya came over with a grin. Did you hear? She asked. Hear what? Silas tried to launch an online antique flipping business a few months ago, she said, half laughing. But apparently he overpromised and underdelivered. Now he's being sued by a few clients. His reputation's kind of tanked. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. But I also didn't feel sorry for him. Actions have consequences. He'd spent a lifetime treating sincerity like weakness, assuming charm could fix everything. But charm doesn't repair trust. It doesn't build a legacy. And it doesn't win you back the people you dismissed. By the end of the evening, I stood at the threshold of the store, watching the last few guests drift down the sidewalk. The lanterns flickered gently above the door. The air smelled like warm wood and lilac. I looked up at the hand-painted sign above the window, R&H Thorne Antiques, EST 1982. Then below it, in smaller script, curated by Mariel Thorne. The business my father built, the one no one thought I was fit to inherit, was not just surviving. It was thriving. And that, more than any dramatic confrontation or fiery argument, was the most satisfying revenge of all. Not cruelty. Not control. Just success. Quiet, solid, undeniable. The black sheep no one believed in was now the shepherd.